She had spent years building walls so high that even she forgot what was hidden behind them. Until someone walked close enough to see through every crack. Maya had always been the girl who had it all figured out. At least that's what everyone thought when they saw her walking through the office each morning. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with confidence. Her blazer was always perfectly pressed, and her smile never seemed to fade. She was the kind of person others looked up to, the one who seemed to glide through life without a single worry. But if you looked closely, really closely, you might notice something different. The way her fingers gripped her coffee cup just a little too tight, the slight pause before she answered questions as if she was calculating every word, the fact that she always ate lunch alone at her desk, claiming she was too busy to join the others in the break room. Maya worked as a marketing director at a mid-sized company downtown. She had climbed the ladder quickly, impressing everyone with her sharp mind and unwavering dedication. Her presentations were flawless, her campaigns successful, and her team respected her leadership. From the outside, she was living the dream that many people chase but never catch. Yet every morning when Maya looked in the bathroom mirror before work, she practiced the same routine she'd been doing for years. She would straighten her shoulders, lift her chin, and put on what she called her game face. It was a smile that said everything was under control, even when her heart was racing with anxiety about the day ahead. The truth was, Maya had learned this trick when she was just a little girl. Growing up in a house where showing emotions was seen as weakness, she quickly discovered that if she appeared strong and capable, people would leave her alone. If she cried, she was told to stop being dramatic. If she showed fear, she was called weak. So she learned to push everything down, deep inside where no one could see it. This lesson served her well in school, where teachers praised her for being mature and responsible. It helped her in college, where she excelled academically while her classmates struggled with homesickness and social drama. And it definitely helped her in her career, where emotional control was valued above almost everything else. But lately, the weight of keeping up this perfect image was becoming harder to bear. Maya's days started at 5 in the morning and often didn't end until well past midnight. She would review emails while brushing her teeth, take client calls during her commute, and work through lunch breaks without even realizing she was hungry. Her apartment, like her office, was immaculate. Everything had its place, and she kept it that way with the same rigid control she applied to every other area of her life. The kitchen counters were spotless, the books on her shelves arranged by size and color, and her closet organized with military precision. Friends who visited often commented on how together she seemed, never knowing that she sometimes spent hours cleaning the same surfaces over and over again when anxiety took hold. Maya's phone buzzed constantly with messages from clients, colleagues, and family members who all seemed to need something from her. She had become the person everyone turned to when they needed a problem solved or a decision made. While this made her valuable at work, it also meant she rarely had a moment to herself. The irony was that despite being surrounded by people all day, Maya felt incredibly lonely. She had acquaintances and professional relationships, but no one who really knew her. How could they? She had spent so many years hiding her true feelings that she wasn't even sure what those feelings were anymore. Her relationships followed the same pattern. She would meet someone, and they would be drawn to her confidence and success. But as time went on, they would start to sense that something was missing. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but there was a distance that Maya maintained, a wall that she never let anyone cross. Eventually, they would drift away, leaving her more convinced than ever that it was safer to rely only on herself. The divorce had been the hardest blow. 2 years of marriage to someone who thought he knew her, only to realize that he had fallen in love with the image she projected, not the person she actually was. When he finally left, he told her that living with her was like being married to a beautiful statue. The words stung because deep down she knew he was right. Since then, Maya had thrown herself even deeper into work. She took on extra projects, volunteered for difficult assignments, and made herself indispensable to everyone around her. If she stayed busy enough, she reasoned, there wouldn't be time to think about how empty her life felt behind all the success and recognition. Her family called regularly, but those conversations always followed the same script. They would ask about work, she would share her latest achievements, and they would express pride in how well she was doing. No one asked how she was really feeling or if she was happy. Maybe they sensed that such questions wouldn't be welcome, Or maybe they were just comfortable with the surface-level relationship they had always maintained. Maya had perfected the art of deflection. When colleagues asked about her weekend plans, she would mention a work project or a gym session. When friends tried to dig deeper into her thoughts, she would turn the conversation back to them. She had become an expert at appearing open and engaged while revealing absolutely nothing about her inner world. The stress was starting to show in small ways, though. Her sleep was restless, filled with dreams about missing important deadlines or forgetting crucial meetings. She had developed a habit of checking her phone multiple times during the night, worried that she might miss an urgent message. Her appetite had decreased, and she often forgot to eat until her stomach started cramping from emptiness. But Maya had learned to push through physical discomfort just as easily as she pushed through emotional pain. She carried antacids in her purse, kept energy bars in her desk drawer, and had mastered the art of looking alert even when exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a heavy coat. The most challenging part wasn't maintaining the facade at work or with acquaintances. The hardest moments came when she was alone in her apartment late at night, when the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself felt less like protection and more like a prison. In those quiet moments, she sometimes wondered what it would be like to let someone see the real her, the person behind all the achievements and accolades. But the thought was quickly pushed away, replaced by the familiar voice in her head that reminded her why she had built those walls in the first place. It was safer this way, she told herself. More reliable. People might let you down, but success and control never would. As Maya prepared for another busy week, checking her calendar and reviewing her presentation notes for the 100th time, she had no idea that everything she thought she knew about strength, vulnerability, and connection was about to be challenged in ways she never could have imagined. It was a Thursday evening, and the office building was almost empty. Maya sat at her desk surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, staring at her computer screen with tired eyes. The presentation she was working on could save the biggest client her company had ever had, but right now, nothing seemed to be going right. Every slide looked wrong, every word felt forced, and the deadline was approaching fast. She had been working on this project for weeks, staying late every night, skipping meals, and pushing herself harder than ever before. The client was demanding, the stakes were high, and Maya knew that failure wasn't an option. Her boss had made it clear that landing this deal could mean a promotion, while losing it might cost several people their jobs. Maya rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. She had sent her team home hours ago, insisting she could handle the final touches alone. That was always her way, taking on the heavy lifting herself rather than asking for help. She glanced at the clock and realized it was past 10. The cleaning crew had already been through her floor, and the security guard had checked on her twice. Just as she was about to restart her presentation for the 5th time that evening, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Maya looked up, expecting to see the security guard making another round, but instead, a man she barely recognized appeared in her doorway. He was from the IT department, someone she had seen in passing but never really noticed. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee and had a concerned expression on his face. "Sorry to bother you," he said softly, "but I noticed your light was still on when I was finishing up some server maintenance. Thought you might need this." He held up one of the coffee cups, steam rising from the lid. Maya was caught off guard. In all her years at the company, no one had ever checked on her during these late-night work sessions. She usually preferred it that way, but something about his gesture surprised her. "Oh, thank you," she said, accepting the coffee. "You didn't have to do that." "I know what it's like to be stuck on a difficult project," he replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Mind if I ask what's got you here so late? Maybe a fresh pair of eyes might help." Maya hesitated. Her first instinct was to politely decline and send him on his way. She had always handled her problems alone, and she wasn't about to start asking for help now, but there was something different about his approach. He wasn't offering help because he wanted something in return or because he was trying to impress her. He seemed genuinely concerned. "It's this client presentation," she found herself saying. "Nothing I create seems right. I've been working on it for weeks, but every time I think I'm close, something feels off." She gestured at her screen, where colorful charts and graphs filled the display. He leaned forward slightly, studying the presentation. "Can you tell me about the client?" "What are they really looking for?" Maya began explaining the project, and as she talked, something unexpected happened. Instead of judging her work or offering quick fixes, he asked thoughtful questions. He wanted to understand not just what she was creating, but why it wasn't working. His questions made her think about the project differently. As they worked together, Maya learned that his name was David, and he had been with the company for about 6 months. He told her about his background in data analysis and how he had transitioned into IT work. What struck her most was his honesty about his own struggles. He mentioned how overwhelming the corporate world had felt when he first started, and how he had learned to break big problems into smaller, manageable pieces. "I used to think I had to figure everything out on my own," David said, adjusting a chart on her screen. "But I realized that sometimes the best solutions come when you step back and let someone else see what you've been staring at too long." Maya watched him work, noticing how calm and methodical he was. There was no urgency in his movements, no stress in his voice. It was such a contrast to her usual frantic pace that she found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks. When he suggested they take a short break to clear their heads, she actually agreed. They walked to the break room together, and David made her laugh with stories about some of the stranger IT requests he had received. Maya couldn't remember the last time she had genuinely laughed at work. Usually her interactions were all business, focused on deadlines and deliverables. But talking with David felt different, more natural. When they returned to her desk, Maya found that her perspective on the presentation had shifted. With David's input, she was able to see the project with fresh eyes. The solution that had been eluding her suddenly became clear. They worked together for another hour, refining the slides and polishing the message. By midnight, Maya had a presentation she was actually proud of. More importantly, she had experienced something she hadn't felt in years: the relief that comes from sharing a burden with someone else. As David packed up his things, he mentioned that he often worked late and would be happy to help again if she ever needed it. Walking to the parking garage together, Maya felt something she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't just gratitude for David's help with the presentation. It was something deeper, a sense that maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone. The feeling was both comforting and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, David began appearing in Maya's life in small but consistent ways. It started innocently enough. He would stop by her office in the morning to see how the big presentation had gone, or he would bring her tea instead of coffee, after remembering she had mentioned preferring it. These gestures were so subtle that Maya almost didn't notice them at first. But as days passed, she began to look forward to these brief interactions. David had a way of checking in without making her feel like she was being watched or managed. He would ask how her day was going, and unlike most people who ask the same question, he actually seemed to want to hear the answer. Maya found herself sharing more than she intended. When a difficult client meeting left her frustrated, she mentioned it to David when he stopped by her office. Instead of offering quick advice or trying to fix the situation, he simply listened. He asked questions that helped her work through her own thoughts, and somehow, talking to him made the problems feel more manageable. One afternoon, when Maya was dealing with a particularly stressful day, David appeared with a small potted plant. "I noticed your office doesn't have any green in it," he said, placing the small succulent on her windowsill. "These are nearly impossible to kill, so it should survive even in a corporate environment." Maya stared at the little plant, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. No one had ever brought her something just to brighten her space. The plant was simple and practical, just like David's approach to everything else. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it showed that he had been paying attention to details about her life that others overlooked. As the weeks went by, their conversations grew longer and more personal. David shared stories about growing up in a small town, about feeling lost when he first moved to the city, and about the anxiety he sometimes felt in social situations. His openness was foreign to Maya, who had spent years perfecting the art of revealing nothing personal about herself. But something about David's honesty made her want to reciprocate. She began sharing small details about her own life, her love of old movies, her frustration with always being seen as the person who had everything together, and her tendency to work too hard because she didn't know how to relax. David never seemed shocked by anything she told him, and he never offered judgment or unsolicited advice. Instead, he would share his own similar experiences or simply acknowledge what she was feeling. When Maya mentioned that she rarely took lunch breaks, David started bringing sandwiches to share. When she admitted that she often worked through weekends, he suggested they take a walk around the block to get some fresh air. These small acts of kindness began to chip away at the walls Maya had built around herself. She started to realize that her rigid self-control, while helpful in some situations, had also isolated her from the kind of connections that make life meaningful. David's presence in her daily routine made her aware of how lonely she had become. The turning point came during a particularly difficult week when everything seemed to go wrong at once. The big client she had worked so hard to impress decided to go with a competitor. Her boss called an emergency meeting to discuss budget cuts and possible layoffs. Her mother called to criticize her life choices, and her ex-husband sent legal papers demanding changes to their settlement agreement. Maya's usual response to stress was to work harder, stay later, and push through the problems with sheer determination. But this time felt different. The weight of everything seemed heavier than usual, and her normal coping strategies weren't working. It was Friday evening, and Maya was alone in her office, staring at her computer screen without really seeing it. She had been crying quietly for the past hour, something she rarely allowed herself to do, especially at work. When David appeared in her doorway, she quickly tried to compose herself, wiping her eyes and straightening her shoulders. But David didn't pretend not to notice her tears. Instead of walking away or making small talk, he quietly closed her office door and sat down across from her desk. "Rough day?" he asked gently. Something about his tone, so different from the professional sympathy she was used to receiving, broke through her remaining defenses. Maya found herself telling David about the lost client, the stress at work, and the pressure she felt to keep everything perfect. For the first time in years, she let someone see her vulnerability without trying to minimize it or explain it away. David listened without trying to fix anything or offer solutions. He simply sat with her in that moment of raw honesty, and Maya realized that this was what she had been missing all along. Someone who could see her struggles without needing her to be strong all the time. When Maya finally stopped talking, David said something that surprised her. "You know, you don't have to carry all of this alone. It doesn't make you weak to ask for help or to let people see when things are difficult." That night, as Maya drove home, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was relief. The relief that comes from being truly seen by another person and not being rejected for it. For the first time, she began to wonder what life might look like if she allowed herself to be vulnerable more often. The weeks following Maya's moment of vulnerability brought changes she hadn't expected. Losing the big client had created a ripple effect throughout the company. Budget meetings became more frequent, and there was talk of restructuring departments. Maya's job, once secure and stable, suddenly felt uncertain. The promotion she had been counting on was put on hold indefinitely. But instead of retreating into her usual pattern of working even harder and shutting everyone out, Maya found herself doing something different. When David asked how she was handling the stress, she actually told him the truth. She admitted that she was scared about her job security and worried about what would happen if more clients decided to leave. This honesty felt strange at first, like speaking a foreign language after years of only knowing one way to communicate. But David's response surprised her. Instead of seeming disappointed by her fears or trying to reassure her with empty platitudes, he simply nodded and said, "That sounds really difficult. How can I help?" Maya had spent so many years believing that showing weakness would make people lose respect for her, but the opposite seemed to be happening. Her relationship with David was growing stronger, and she was beginning to notice that other colleagues were responding to her differently too. When she stopped pretending to have all the answers, people started approaching her more often for genuine conversations rather than just work-related issues. Her team, which had always been professional and efficient, began to feel more like a family. When Maya admitted during a team meeting that she was struggling to come up with new strategies, instead of losing confidence in her leadership, her team members started offering creative ideas and support. They stayed late to help brainstorm solutions, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. But the process of becoming more open wasn't smooth or easy. Maya discovered that years of emotional control couldn't be undone overnight. There were days when she would wake up and immediately put on her old protective mask, falling back into familiar patterns of perfectionism and isolation. During particularly stressful moments, she would catch herself shutting David out, reverting to her default setting of handling everything alone. David seemed to understand these setbacks without taking them personally. When Maya would pull away, he didn't push or demand explanations. Instead, he would simply continue being consistent in his kindness, waiting patiently for her to find her way back to the openness they had been building together. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, Maya invited David to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time she had let anyone into her personal space in months. As he looked around her perfectly organized home, she felt suddenly self-conscious about how sterile everything appeared. Every surface was clean, every book in its place, every decoration carefully arranged. "Your place is beautiful," David said, but Maya caught something in his tone that suggested he was seeing more than just the neat appearance. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" Maya found herself saying. "Sometimes I think I organize things because it's the only way I feel in control." David smiled gently. "There's nothing wrong with liking things organized. But do you actually feel at home here, or does it feel like a showroom?" The question hit deeper than Maya expected. She looked around her apartment with fresh eyes and realized that David was right. She had created a space that looked perfect but felt empty. There were no personal photos on display, no cozy reading nooks, no evidence of hobbies or interests beyond work. It was beautiful but lifeless, just like the image she had been projecting for years. That night, as they cooked dinner together, Maya experienced something she hadn't felt since childhood, the simple joy of sharing everyday moments with another person. David moved around her kitchen with easy comfort, asking where things were kept and telling stories. That made her laugh while they prepared the meal, together. But the real test came a few weeks later when Maya's mother announced she was coming for an unexpected visit. Maya's relationship with her mother had always been complicated. Her mother was a woman who valued appearance above all else, someone who had taught Maya from a young age that emotional displays were embarrassing and that success was measured only by external achievements. The news of her mother's visit sent Maya into a tailspin of anxiety. She spent days cleaning her already spotless apartment, practicing conversations in her mirror, and reverting to many of her old protective behaviors. David noticed the change immediately. "You seem really stressed about this visit," he observed one evening. When Maya was reorganizing her bookshelf for the third time that week. "My mother has very high standards," Maya replied, not meeting his eyes. "She expects things to be perfect." "What happens if they're not perfect?" David asked quietly. Maya paused, her hand still on the books. She had never really thought about that question before. "I guess she gets disappointed, and when she's disappointed, she lets you know it." David sat down on her couch, patting the cushion beside him. "Maya, you know you don't have to perform for me, right? And you don't have to perform for your mother either, even if that's what you've always done." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest Maya had ever had. She told David about growing up in a house where emotions were seen as weakness, where crying was met with criticism, and where love felt conditional on achievement. She explained how she had learned to hide her true feelings so early that she sometimes forgot what those feelings even were. David listened without judgment, occasionally sharing his own experiences with family expectations and the pressure to be someone other than who you really are. By the end of the evening, Maya felt both exhausted and relieved. She had shared parts of her story that she had never told anyone, and David was still there, still caring, still accepting her exactly as she was. When Maya's mother arrived the following weekend, Maya was as prepared as she could be. The apartment was spotless, the meals were planned, and Maya had mentally rehearsed responses to the usual questions and criticisms. But this time, something was different. David had offered to be there for support, and Maya had surprised herself by accepting. The visit started exactly as Maya had expected. Her mother walked through the apartment with a critical eye, making small comments about the furniture arrangement, and asking pointed questions about Maya's career prospects. She seemed disappointed to learn about the lost client and the uncertain promotion, responding with suggestions about what Maya should have done differently. For the first hour, Maya fell into her familiar role of trying to manage her mother's mood and deflect her criticism. But when her mother started commenting on Maya's appearance, suggesting she looked tired and needed to take better care of herself, something inside Maya shifted. "Mom," Maya said quietly, "I've been going through a difficult time at work. I am tired, and I've been stressed. That's normal for someone in my situation." Her mother's eyebrows rose slightly. Maya had never talked back or defended herself before. "Well, you can't let these things show, dear. People will think you can't handle the pressure." This was the moment Maya had been unconsciously preparing for her entire adult life. She looked at her mother, then at David, who was sitting quietly nearby, offering silent support simply by being present. She thought about all the conversations they had shared, all the moments when she had been vulnerable and the world hadn't ended. "I think it's okay for people to know when I'm struggling," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "I think it's actually healthier than pretending everything is perfect all the time." Her mother looked shocked. This was not the daughter she knew, the one who absorbed criticism without complaint and worked tirelessly to meet impossible standards. "Maya, I don't think you understand how the world works. If you show weakness, people will take advantage of you." "Maybe some people will," Maya replied, glancing at David with gratitude. "But the people who matter, the people who actually care about me, they want to know the real me. They don't want me to pretend to be perfect." The conversation that followed was unlike any Maya had ever had with her mother. For the first time, she spoke honestly about how the constant criticism had affected her, how exhausting it was to maintain a perfect facade, and how lonely she had become trying to live up to impossible expectations. Her mother didn't take it well initially. She became defensive, arguing that she had only wanted the best for Maya and that the world was harsh for women who showed vulnerability. But as the weekend progressed, something began to shift between them. Maya's honesty, while uncomfortable, opened a door to a more authentic relationship. By Sunday evening, when her mother was preparing to leave, there was a tentative understanding between them. Her mother still didn't fully comprehend Maya's new approach to life, but she could see that her daughter seemed happier and more at peace than she had in years. 6 months later, Maya's life looked completely different from the outside, but more importantly, it felt different from the inside. She had found a new job at a smaller company where collaboration was valued over individual achievement, and where her authenticity was seen as a strength rather than a liability. Her relationship with David had grown into something beautiful and real, built on a foundation of mutual vulnerability and genuine acceptance. They had learned to support each other through difficulties while celebrating each other's successes without competition or judgment. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maya's relationship with herself. She had learned to recognize her own needs and emotions instead of constantly pushing them aside. She took breaks when she was tired, asked for help when she needed it, and allowed herself to feel disappointment or frustration without immediately trying to fix or hide those feelings. The small succulent David had given her months earlier had grown and thrived on her office windowsill, and Maya had added other plants to her workspace. Her apartment, too, had become more welcoming. She had hung personal photos on the walls, created a cozy reading corner, and filled the space with things that brought her joy rather than just things that looked impressive. Maya's colleagues at her new job saw her as someone who was both competent and approachable. She had become the kind of leader who admitted mistakes, asked for input, and supported her team through challenges rather than demanding perfection from everyone around her. At a company gathering 6 months into her new job, Maya found herself genuinely enjoying the casual conversation and laughter of her coworkers. She moved through the room not with the calculated confidence of her past, but with the quiet strength that comes from knowing you can be loved and accepted exactly as you are. Standing by the window at the end of the evening, Maya caught her reflection in the glass and smiled. It wasn't the practiced professional smile she had worn for so many years, but a real one that reached her eyes and came from a place of genuine contentment. She had learned that true strength didn't come from having all the answers or never showing weakness. It came from having the courage to be authentic, to be vulnerable, and to let the people who mattered see all of who she really was. The layers of protection she had built around herself were finally gone, and instead of feeling exposed and frightened, she felt free to be human, to make mistakes, to ask for help, and to love and be loved without conditions or performance requirements. It had taken courage to let those walls come down, but on the other side of that courage, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a life that was truly her own.